guys, it's Nick with the Whip Shop. On today's video, I want to discuss a very often discussed topic, which is I'm getting into whip cracking, never had a decent whip before or any whip before in my life. What whip length do you recommend for me? To cut to the chase, if you guys are kind of pressed for time, 6 feet. And in this video, I'm going to discuss why I think a 6-foot bullwhip is the best option for your first whip. Now here in front of me, I have 5 bullwhips. The one on the left is 4 feet, and the one on the very far right is 12 feet. Now, as we work our way from short to long, you'll notice that the action slows way down, meaning that the time between me throwing the whip and the whip cracking increases with whip length. Also with whip length, you will find that various cracks begin to drop off and you can't do them anymore. Here is an instance of a 40-foot bullwhip thrown by Leo Maxwell at the 2018 LA Whip Meet. This particular whip, the only crack you can do with it is overhead flicks or side flicks if you're strong enough. So that's the far end of the spectrum. The long whips, you can only do basically 1 or 2 cracks with them. On a shorter scale, you can do most of those cracks, but some of them you can't do anymore because the whip is just so short and you have to just jerk your arm really quickly and inconveniently to get it to do that same crack. So there's kind of a sweet spot in the middle of this range here that we're going to talk about. So let's begin with the 4-foot nylon whip. I made this whip a couple of years ago solely for target work at the LA Whip Meet. So I'm just going to take it through a cattleman's crack. Right off the bat, you can tell it's a pretty fast whip. The shorter the whip is, the faster the action. Not bad. Overhead crack. Pretty quick. Reverse direction overhead crack. So that's really fast and kind of uncomfortable for me. So we're going to do a volley. Would I recommend that speed for beginners? No way. I know I couldn't do that at least until I was a year into whip cracking. Overhead flick. Really inconvenient and jerky. I don't like the feel of that for overhead crack. So pretty much the only thing I feel really comfortable with this little whip is a cattleman's crack. And an overhead crack as long as I'm not switching directions. Not too bad. So, it's a short whip, it's really fast, and I don't think a beginner is going to be able to pick up that kind of timing and speed. So, I don't recommend a 4-footer for your first whip. The next 2 whips that we're going to discuss, they can both work. Here's the 6-foot whip. You'll notice this one does have a wooden handle. It has no effect on the performance. It's just a cosmetic addition that I now offer on nickswhipshop.com, if you were wondering. Cattleman's crack. You'll already notice how much slower the action is. From the time I raise the whip up, from the time it cracks, is a lot more time to think. It's a lot more time to just feel what the whip is doing instead of just boom, boom, like you would with the 4-footer. Cattleman's crack feels great. Overhead crack feels very smooth, good length, good timing. If we were to reverse that overhead crack and do another one, go straight into another one, plenty of time for me to orient my arm in a good way that allows the whip to crack. Let's do some fast figure 8s. Much more manageable. Volley. Much better. Overhead flick. Just see how much time you have to work with. And it's not excessive. It's not such a heavy whip that you are struggling to hold the thing above the ground like you'll see with some of these longer whips that we're about to test out. So, 6-foot whip. It's a great beginner's whip as far as length goes. A 7-foot whip, there isn't a huge difference, just a little bit more time. You'll get a little bit more time in between. This is one of the favorite whips that I've ever made. I actually had to keep it. It is a more of a streamlined target whip built upon a 3/16 inch spring steel rod with 2 platted bellies, 16 plat overlay. It's quickly becoming my favorite whip that I've ever made. But look at the time here that we have to work with. Everything is just, that is my pace right there. Very versatile. Overhead cracks. Overhead flicks, I mean, sorry. Underhand flick. Body wraps. Everything. Everything I want this thing to do, it'll do it. Coachman's crack, no problem. No problem. And now we'll try. It could do 4 corners, but I just can't do the 4 corners. So a 7-foot whip, another great whip for a beginner. Next up, we have our 9-foot Indiana Jones style bullwhip. Now this whip, you'll notice a significant difference because it is a lot longer and it is a bit heavier. So we're gonna go through the cattleman's crack. Notice how much time there is. Notice I really have to accent that upswing. That's what's so important with really long whips. Longer whips like this require patience. They really do. And if you're used to a short whip, a long whip is going to seem a little boring to you. But personally, I enjoy it. Overhead crack, reverse directions. Look at how much more time. I'll show you a little comparison here. I mean, it's night and day difference. There's probably a mathematical formula that you could actually apply to this. For every foot, you get so much more time. I'm not aware of it, but the crack that I think is the best with a longer whip, like a 9-foot whip, like this one, is flicks. Side flicks, overhead flicks. Just smooth as butter. They are flowy whips. So I'm going to attempt to do a volley with this thing. I can't promise you anything. But you'll notice it's a lot more difficult because there's more weight that we're having to keep off the ground. Even the overhead crack is more challenging because I'm having to support all that weight and swing it. The longer the whip, the harder you have to swing it to keep the whip off the ground, applying enough centrifugal force. So we're gonna do a volley here with this 9-foot whip, or attempt to anyway. About the best I can do. My forearm is on fire because of that. So, overhead cracks. 2 cracks I feel really comfortable with this whip is a flick. Cattleman's crack, not so much. So the amount of different cracks we can do as we're working our way through is starting to decrease. Here's the overhead, or the cattleman's crack, side flicks, coachman's crack. That was really inconvenient. So 9 feet, we're starting to lose some options as far as how many different types of cracks we can do. Lastly, we have here a 12-foot bullwhip. So we'll start off like we have been doing with all of these whips. I'm gonna actually put the wrist loop on. We'll start with the cattleman's crack. And you'll notice this is gonna take a lot of strength to lift the whip off the ground. Did you see how much time there was? Look at all that time. So cattleman's crack is pretty difficult. Now a flick is becoming very, very easy. So something I should mention is a flick is much easier with a 12-foot whip than a flick is with a 4-foot whip. So it's funny how the spectrum kind of changes as you move along. Some whips are harder when they're shorter, easier when they're longer. If you do exceed the 12-foot length on a whip, pretty much the only few cracks that you're left with are an overhead crack. Any longer than 12 feet, you have to have quite a bit of upper body strength to get an overhead crack, especially if you want to reverse directions. So, cattleman's crack is difficult. Overhead flick is not bad at all. Anything else, near impossible. For me, personally, I'll try a volley. Oh boy. Ooh. Whoo, that's tough. So, we've lost so many cracks. Coachman's, I guess, if you want to look crazy when you're doing it. 12-foot whip, it's fun, but it's kind of a one-trick pony or one-trick bull, if you will. I saw Adam Winrich do this once and I really liked it, so I've been doing it ever since. There's your 12-foot whip. Would I recommend it for beginning? I would not. So we've worked our way down the line and you could see some of the benefits of a short whip and the benefits of a really long whip. So let's revisit the two whips that I think are the best length for beginning. So much easier on the arm, no fatigue whatsoever. I have so much versatility. Any crack that you tell me to do, this whip has no trouble doing it. Same with the 6-foot whip. That was the 7-footer you just saw. No problem whatsoever. It's easy. It can do everything. Overhand flicks, underhand flicks, coachman's crack, body wraps. It's all there and easily accessible because of the versatile length of a 6 or 7-foot whip. So guys, as a disclaimer, a 6-foot whip is easier to learn on and more versatile than a longer whip. But if you want to get a longer whip to start off with, do it. Sure, the learning curve might be a little bit sharper, but with time, you'll get it. Same with a short whip like this. A 4-foot whip is really fun. You can just tuck it away and kind of put it in your pocket, and it's great for confined spaces. Low ceilings, close-in walls. I actually quite often will take this whip inside somewhere and put out candles with it. Just have fun. Something you obviously cannot do with a really long whip. So the benefits of a short whip, you know, it's fast. It's compact. It's light. It won't wear out your arm. You do have to be a little bit more on it though as far as timing goes. Longer whip, confined spaces, forget it. You have to have quite a radius around you to crack that whip. 24 feet at least. So that's something to also think about. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful in kind of choosing the first whip for you. If you have any questions, please drop a comment. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the whips you see here. Also, any of the whips that you see here are available for custom order. If you say, Nick, I really love that particular whip, I can replicate it exactly for you if you order at nickswhipshop.com. Guys, please like and subscribe. Share it with your friends. Many videos coming. It's spring. I'm so happy. It's funny because when spring finally comes around, you realize how blue you've been. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video.